The rugged, windswept landscapes of northern Scotland hide mysteries, long buried beneath layers of peat and stone, where ancient hill forts crown towering peaks and intricately carved stones offer a glimpse into a civilization that once dominated the Highlands. Excavations in Pictish territories have unveiled a complex web of Iron Age settlements that flourished well before the Romans set foot on Scottish soil. These discoveries paint a picture of advanced societies that had firmly established themselves across the challenging terrain by the 3rd century CE, stretching from the Forth to the Northern Islands. Sites like Burghead in Moray have revealed massive defensive earthworks dating back to the late Iron Age, with timber-laced ramparts that extend over 100 meters. The engineering skills demonstrated here are impressive, with interwoven wooden beams supporting stone walls, a technique that would be perfected later during the peak of Pictish power. Inside these fortified enclosures, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of metalworking, iron slag, bronze debris, and imported Roman glass beads and pottery fragments, all hinting at a thriving trade network reaching far beyond the Highlands. The artifacts found in these early settlements showcase a sophisticated material culture and hint at complex social hierarchies. Excavations at Rinny and Abensea have revealed exquisite metalwork, including brooches adorned with spiral patterns and zoomorphic designs, hallmarks of Pictish art. The quality of these artifacts suggests a society of specialized artisans, where personal ornamentation and weaponry signaled one's status in a stratified culture. Hill forts, such as those at Tapanoth and Mithertap, offer further insights into the territorial structure of pre-Roman Scotland. Positioned high above river valleys and coastal routes, these strongholds were strategically placed, signifying a land divided among rival chieftains who ruled through both military might and the display of wealth. Archaeological finds like rotary querns, iron tools, and storage pits within these sites suggest that these communities were self-sufficient, capable of supporting large populations even through the harsh winters of the Highlands. Bronze mirrors uncovered at places like Balmshana bear Celtic motifs, executed with such skill that they rival Roman craftsmanship, yet their iconography remains distinctly non-Roman, further solidifying the unique identity of the Pictish people. Place name analysis throughout Pictish territories gives us valuable clues about the region's linguistic past. The prefix pit found in hundreds of Scottish place names, such as Pit Locri and Pit Medden, originates from the Pictish word meaning a portion or share of land. This widespread use points to an organized administrative system, possibly based on Pictish social and legal customs, dividing the landscape into regions governed by chieftains. Inscriptions on stone monuments offer brief, tantalizing glimpses into the Pictish language, though these texts are limited in their ability to provide a full linguistic reconstruction. The dross stone at St. Van's bears one of the longest Pictish inscriptions, which when translated, appears to document names and possibly kinship relationships. Linguists have compared Pictish with other Celtic languages, and while much is still debated, there are clear links to the Brittonic branch of Celtic, aligning more closely with Welsh and Cornish than with the Godlic languages spoken in Ireland and Western Scotland. The complex relationship between Pictish and its Celtic relatives is reflected in river names like Devon, Findhorn, and Spey, which preserve pre-Pictish Celtic elements, perhaps representing an earlier language spoken by the region's inhabitants. Pictish, evolving over time, would retain ties to these Celtic roots while developing its own distinct linguistic features. Personal names in later Pictish king lists, such as Breedneck and Tallaghan, show clear Celtic origins, and the recurring use of the element Tari in royal names suggests a connection to a Celtic word for forehead or front, potentially signifying prominence or leadership. Roman interactions with the Picts began during the campaigns of Gnaeus Julius Agricola in the 80s CE, although the term Picti would not appear in classical sources until much later. The historian Tacitus, in his account of his father-in-law Agricola's campaigns, describes fierce resistance from northern tribes, skilled in guerrilla tactics, and utilizing their intimate knowledge of the terrain to frustrate Roman efforts. In 84 CE, the Battle of Mons Gropius saw Agricola's legions face a confederation of Pictish warriors led by Calgacus. While Tacitus's account is heavily filtered through Roman propaganda, It provides valuable insight into the military prowess and social organization of the Picts, depicting warriors who fought on foot and from chariots, armed with long swords and small shields, often adorned in war paint or tattoos. Roman writers, often biased, viewed the Picts and their neighbors as primitive savage tribes. These portrayals, part of a broader imperial narrative, obscured the complex and sophisticated societies that archaeology has since revealed. Historians like Cassius Dio, writing in the early 3rd century, offer a more detailed picture of these northern tribes, distinguishing between the Caledonians and the Meitae, two major confederations. Dio's descriptions, which include depictions of these peoples living in tents, going barefoot, and practicing communal marriage, must be taken with caution, as they were intended to serve imperial interests. Roman accounts consistently portrayed the northern British tribes as barbaric, furthering the idea of Rome's civilizing mission, while the archaeological record paints a much richer, more intricate picture of life in Pictish Scotland. This balance of archaeological evidence and historical records allows us to piece together a more nuanced understanding of early Scotland. The Picts were not simply a group of savages resisting Roman occupation. They were a complex people with deep-rooted cultural traditions, sophisticated societies, and a unique identity that would leave its mark on the landscape for centuries to come. The portrayal of nudity in Roman accounts likely stems from their misunderstanding of Celtic customs, particularly regarding ritual nakedness in warfare, an act reserved for specific ceremonies rather than everyday life. More reliable are Roman military records and geographical documents that provide concrete information about the northern British peoples and their territories. The Antonine Itinerary and other imperial texts offer place names and tribal boundaries, which can be cross-referenced with archaeological sites and later historical accounts. These administrative records reveal that Roman knowledge of northern Scotland was far more extensive than previously assumed, shaped by intelligence gathered from trade contacts, diplomatic missions, and military reconnaissance. One of the most contentious topics in early Scottish history is the emergence of the Picts as a distinct people. Traditional theories, heavily influenced by medieval origin myths, have long suggested that the Picts were foreign invaders who arrived from continental Europe or Scandinavia. These theories were supported by perceived physical differences between the Picts and other Celtic groups, as well as by their distinctive artistic and political practices. However, modern archaeological and genetic evidence strongly supports the idea that the Picts developed locally, rather than through large-scale migration. Excavations throughout Pictish territories show a continuity of culture stretching back to the Bronze Age, with gradual evolution in material culture rather than sudden foreign replacement. The hill fort tradition, metalworking techniques, and artistic styles that later defined Pictish civilization all have deep roots in the Scottish Iron Age. This suggests that the Picts were the result of long-term cultural development, rather than the result of an abrupt foreign incursion. Genetic studies of ancient DNA from Pictish period burials further support this view, revealing close genetic ties between early medieval Scottish populations and their Iron Age predecessors. While there is some evidence of external influence, particularly from Scandinavian sources in later periods, the basic genetic structure of northern Scottish populations remained largely unchanged during the emergence and expansion of the Pictish people. The appearance of elaborate symbol stones and high-status metalwork during this period marks a shift in the display of elite power and territorial marking, key elements of what would become Pictish civilization. The geographical distribution of early Pictish cultural markers further suggests political consolidation, with symbol stones and other distinctively Pictish artifacts appearing across territories once divided among multiple tribes. This cultural expansion coincided with the Roman withdrawal from northern Britain, possibly in response to the power vacuum left by Rome's departure. Environmental factors played a significant role in shaping Pictish development during these critical centuries. Thus, the emergence of the Picts as a distinct people was the result of a complex combination of factors during the 4th and 5th centuries CE. Indigenous Celtic populations, deeply rooted in the Scottish Iron Age, adapted to changing political circumstances following the Roman retreat, developing new forms of social organization and cultural expression. This process of ethnogenesis created a people who would dominate northern and eastern Scotland for centuries, leaving behind a rich archaeological legacy that continues to shed light on their remarkable civilization. The consolidation of Pictish identity during the 4th and 5th centuries was shaped by centuries of resistance to Roman expansion. The conflict began with Agricola's campaigns into Caledonia, where Roman authority extended only as far as the Cheviot Hills. Beyond this frontier lay fierce tribal confederations capable of organized resistance. When Gnaeus Julius Agricola became governor in 78 CE, he attempted to expand Roman control further into Scotland, a campaign that would ultimately fail but would set the stage for the rise of Pictish civilization. Agricola's strategy combined land and naval operations designed to thwart the northern tribes' guerrilla tactics. The Roman legions, including the 9th Legion Hispana, led the land campaign while the Roman fleet conducted reconnaissance missions along the eastern coast, establishing temporary bases and gathering intelligence on tribal movements. Archaeological evidence from Roman marching camps across southern Scotland shows the organized nature of this campaign, with fortified positions built at regular intervals to secure supply lines and support further advances. As the Romans pushed deeper into the highlands, they encountered fierce resistance. The northern tribes, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain, launched hit-and-run attacks on Roman supply columns, often disappearing into forests and mountains where heavily armored Roman soldiers could not follow. These tactics forced Agricola to divide his forces, leaving large garrisons to protect his supply lines while maintaining enough strength for offensive operations. The climactic battle of this campaign was the Battle of Mons Graupius, fought somewhere in the Grampian foothills. Tacitus describes a large Caledonian army, numbering over 30,000 warriors, led by Calgacus. The Roman historian's account portrays the northern tribes as a highly organized military force, with warrior bands positioned according to their weapons and fighting styles across the battlefield. While the precise location of the battle remains uncertain, the conflict marked the high point of Roman efforts to subjugate northern Britain and foreshadowed the rise of Pictish resistance to Roman influence. The Caledonian battle formation at Mons Graupius displayed a level of tactical sophistication that defied Roman assumptions about barbarian warfare. Charioteers were positioned on the flat ground at the base of the hill, using their vehicles as mobile platforms for javelin-armed warriors who could strike at Roman formations before quickly withdrawing to safety. The battle itself was technically a Roman victory, but circumstances prevented Agricola from capitalizing on it. Tacitus claims that 10,000 Caledonians perished in the clash, while Roman losses were limited to just 360, a figure likely exaggerated for literary effect rather than an accurate count. More important, however, was the aftermath. The surviving Caledonian warriors melted into the highland landscape, refusing to submit to Roman rule. Shortly after the battle, Emperor Domitian recalled Agricola, preventing any follow-up campaigns that might have secured Roman control over northern Scotland. This retreat marked a shift in Roman strategy, from conquest to defense. Instead of further attempts at subjugation, successive emperors adopted a defensive stance, constructing fortified boundaries to contain the northern tribes rather than eliminate them. This new defensive approach came to fruition with the construction of Hadrian's Wall, beginning in 122 CE, which became the most ambitious fortification project in Roman Britain, stretching 84 miles from the River Tyne in the east to Solway Firth in the west. The wall was about 15 feet high, with an additional parapet of 6 feet. Its eastern sections were built with dressed stone, while the western portions used turf. The wall was reinforced by 16 major forts, housing auxiliary units totaling approximately 9,000 soldiers, with smaller mile castles and turrets, providing observation points and sally ports for military patrols. This immense construction effort, which took 6 years to complete, involved all 3 Roman legions stationed in Britain, reflecting the significant resources dedicated to it. The design of Hadrian's Wall was not just to block passage, but to control and monitor traffic across the frontier. It served as a base for offensive operations when needed, with the military way running behind the wall to allow rapid troop movements in response to threats. To the south of the wall, the Vallum earthwork created a secure zone for military installations and supply depots. This defensive system acknowledged that complete prevention of raids was impossible, but provided the necessary infrastructure to respond to incursions effectively. Archaeological findings from Hadrian's Wall reveal the daily realities of frontier life during the 2nd century. Inscriptions at the site record units from across the empire, including Germanic, Gaulish, and Dacian auxiliaries, whose diverse military traditions were adapted to the northern frontier. Leather documents preserved at Vindolanda provide intimate details of life within the garrisons. Requests for warm clothing, reports of attacks by Britons, and intelligence on northern tribal movements. These sources provide a picture of low-intensity conflict, punctuated by larger raids that tested Roman defences. The construction of the Antonine Wall coincided with significant changes in northern British society, accelerating the emergence of distinctly Pictish cultural traditions. Archaeological evidence from sites like Traprain Law reveals increasing political centralization among the tribes beyond the Roman frontier. Larger settlements and more intricate material culture indicate the rise of more complex social hierarchies. Roman proximity appears to have spurred political consolidation, paving the way for the formation of the early Pictish kingdoms. However, the Antonine Wall was abandoned around 162 CE as Roman forces retreated back to Hadrian's Wall. This withdrawal was not a military defeat, but a recognition that maintaining an advanced frontier in northern Britain was no longer feasible. The move marked the end of Roman attempts to control additional Scottish territory and had profound consequences for the development of the region's indigenous societies. With direct Roman pressure lifted, the northern tribes began to reshape their political and cultural identities, resulting in the rise of the Pictish civilization. The period following the abandonment of the Antonine Wall, up to the Great Conspiracy of 367 CE, saw the gradual transformation of the tribal confederations described by Roman authors into the Pictish kingdoms that would dominate northern Scotland. This process was influenced by both internal political evolution and changing relationships with Roman Britain, as trade, diplomacy, and occasional warfare led to new forms of cultural exchange. Archaeological evidence indicates increasing sophistication in Pictish material culture during this period, including the creation of elaborate metalwork and stone sculptures, suggesting the rise of powerful royal courts capable of patronizing skilled artisans. The evolution of Pictish warfare during this time reflects both indigenous traditions and the influence of Roman military techniques. Excavations at sites like Clatchard Craig have revealed weapons that combine Celtic designs with innovations inspired by Roman contact. Long iron swords with intricate hilts maintain a focus on individual combat prowess, while also incorporating metallurgical techniques learned through trade or the capture of Roman equipment. Spearheads from this period display similar signs of technological adaptation, with socketed points designed for thrusting rather than throwing, indicating a shift in military tactics. Finally, the practice of body painting and tattooing, which led to the Roman term Picti, the painted people, was not just for intimidation. It had deep cultural significance, reflecting a complex social and religious identity within Pictish society. The marks were more than mere decoration. They were symbols of unity, status, and the connection to ancient traditions that set the Picts apart from the Romans and other Celtic tribes. While archaeological evidence for Pictish body art remains indirect, it is nonetheless compelling. Bronze mirrors found in high-status burials often feature elaborate decorative schemes that may reflect the body painting patterns worn by warriors. Additionally, carved symbol stones display motifs that could represent these tattoo designs, transformed into permanent carvings. The technical skill required to create these intricate patterns points to sophisticated artistic traditions that were passed down alongside other cultural knowledge within Pictish society. The military coordination seen in the Great Conspiracy of 367 CE represents the culmination of centuries of political development among the tribes north of Hadrian's Wall. Roman sources describe the conspiracy as an organized series of attacks along multiple frontiers, designed to overwhelm Roman defenses through sheer numbers and strategic dispersion. Pictish forces moved south from beyond Hadrian's Wall, while Saxon longships raided the eastern coasts, and Irish raiders targeted western Britain. The conspirators demonstrated a detailed knowledge of Roman defensive positions, timing their assaults to coincide with periods of political instability within the empire, when reinforcements were unlikely to arrive from the continent. This level of coordination suggests that diplomatic networks and communication systems had been established, connecting previously disparate peoples across northern Britain and beyond. Ammianus Marcellinus provides the most detailed account of the conspiracy, describing how the attackers ranged freely across Roman Britain, killing and capturing civilians, while avoiding direct confrontation with organized military units. The Roman response to the Great Conspiracy demonstrated both the empire's military strength and the limitations of its defensive strategy in Britain. Count Theodosius arrived with reinforcements from Gaul and led a campaign to restore Roman authority. His military operations, combined with diplomatic initiatives designed to divide the conspirators, ended the immediate crisis, showing that Rome still retained the capacity for effective military action when sufficient resources were committed. However, the long-term significance of the conspiracy lies in its demonstration of the emerging political and military organization among the northern tribes. The ability to coordinate such widespread operations marked the beginning of a new phase of leadership and communication that would shape the post-Roman period in northern Britain. The withdrawal of Roman legions from Britain in 410 CE created a power vacuum that drastically altered the political landscape of northern Scotland. With Roman authority collapsing south of Hadrian's Wall, the Pictish confederations who had resisted Roman expansion for centuries found themselves in a position to expand their territories and solidify their political structures without external interference. This newfound freedom coincided with internal developments that had been building for generations, as tribal chieftains gained wealth and power through successful raids and diplomatic alliances. The result was the formation of distinct Pictish kingdoms that would dominate the Scottish Highlands and Eastern lands for the next 3 centuries. Archaeological evidence from major Pictish centres shows a dramatic increase in construction activity during the 5th century, pointing to rapid political centralisation and economic growth. At Burghead in Moray, excavations have uncovered massive timber-framed ramparts surrounding an area of nearly 30 acres, making it one of the largest fortified sites in early medieval Europe. The formation of the major Pictish kingdoms reflected both geographical constraints and the political opportunities created in the post-Roman environment. To the far north, the kingdom of Caithness emerged, taking its name from the ancient Catti tribe mentioned in Roman sources. Although the harsh climate and limited agricultural potential kept the kingdom relatively small in population, its strategic location controlling the northern sea routes granted its rulers disproportionate influence. Archaeological sites, such as the Cairns of Caithness, reveal that its rulers maintained extensive trade networks, reaching as far as Orkney and beyond, importing luxury goods and raw materials that helped solidify their political authority. In the Central Highlands, the Kingdom of Fortru developed, encompassing much of modern Inverness Shire and the Great Glen. The region's mountainous terrain provided natural defences, while its rivers offered access to both the North Sea and the Atlantic coasts. The rulers of Fortru established their main centre at Craigfadrig near Inverness, where excavations have revealed a vitrified fort, a structure whose stone ramparts were fused by intense heat, likely the result of either construction or destruction. The engineering skills required to create such structures suggest a high level of craftsmanship and access to expert builders who could undertake complex architectural projects. Further south, the Kingdom of the Picts, known as the Kingdom of the Southern Picts, encompassing the fertile lands of Angus and the Mearns, emerged as a powerful force. This region, near the Roman frontier, benefited from the rulers' extensive experience dealing with Roman forces, which proved valuable as the political climate shifted throughout the 5th century. Unlike patrilineal systems, where royal bloodlines are passed down through male ancestors, matrilineal succession meant that a king's sons did not automatically inherit the throne. Instead, succession typically passed to the king's nephews through his sisters, or to other male relatives who could demonstrate maternal descent from previous rulers. This system ensured that royal bloodlines remained closely connected to the broader population, preventing the concentration of power within narrow dynastic lines. The operation of this matrilineal system required a deep knowledge of genealogy and legal procedures to validate competing claims to the throne. Specialized legal scholars and genealogists in Pictish society kept detailed records of royal lineages and the complex relationships that determined legitimate succession. These experts played a crucial role during succession crises, offering authoritative interpretations of traditional laws to resolve disputes without resorting to violence. The matrilineal system also influenced Pictish marriage practices and diplomatic relations in ways that set them apart from their neighbours. Royal marriages primarily served to form political alliances rather than secure dynastic succession, as children of such unions inherited their status through their mother's lineage. This arrangement allowed Pictish kings to marry foreign princesses without compromising their kingdom's independence, fostering complex alliances that could adapt to changing political circumstances. Archaeological evidence suggests that the matrilineal system may have had religious significance, reflecting pre-Christian beliefs about the sources of royal power. Symbol stones from Pictish territories often depict female figures in prominent positions, frequently linked to symbols of power and fertility that may represent goddess figures or deified ancestors. These images suggest that Pictish concepts of legitimate authority were closely tied to female lineages and the supernatural powers believed to be transmitted through them. The earliest Pictish kings known from historical sources emerged from the murky period following the Roman withdrawal, when oral traditions and fragmentary written records began to provide names and approximate reign periods for specific rulers. One such figure, Dres MacCurp, appears in multiple king lists as one of the most significant early Pictish monarchs. He is credited with a reign lasting 100 years, though this clearly represents legendary chronology rather than historical fact. The name Dres comes from a Celtic root meaning riot or tumult, suggesting he may have been a warrior king whose military feats became the foundation for later mythical elaborations. Dres MacCurp exemplifies the complex relationship between historical fact and mythological tradition that characterizes early Pictish sources. While the specific details of his reign cannot be verified, the repeated appearance of his name in independent traditions indicates that he was likely a historical figure whose achievements were remarkable enough to be preserved in oral tradition. The attribution of such a long reign could represent a symbolic golden age of Pictish power and prosperity, condensing the reigns of multiple rulers with similar names into one legendary figure. Later king lists preserve the names of numerous other early Pictish rulers, including Talalok, Mequir Nectan Moby, and Gartnate Murum, whose reigns spanned the formative period of kingdom formation in the 5th and 6th centuries. These names demonstrate the Celtic linguistic heritage of Pictish royal families, while revealing patterns in naming conventions that persisted throughout the era of independent Pictish rule. The element Mac appears consistently in royal genealogies, though its use in the context of matrilineal succession suggests it may have indicated maternal, rather than paternal, relationships. However, the reliability of these early king lists remains a topic of scholarly debate. Compiled centuries after the events they describe, these records may reflect later political propaganda rather than accurate historical memory. The Pictish Chronicle, preserved in medieval manuscripts, offers royal lineages and genealogical data, but much of it cannot be independently verified. While the apparent alignment of Pictish and Irish royal chronologies hints at possible manipulation of the historical record to support contemporary political agendas, the king lists still provide valuable insights into the political organization and cultural values of the Picts during the period of kingdom formation. Despite their limitations, the king lists highlight a Pictish society where political authority was heavily tied to military achievement and territorial expansion. The royal narratives preserved in these lists suggest that these accomplishments were celebrated in oral tradition and possibly commemorated through ritual performances that reinforced royal legitimacy. The establishment of major political centers during this period reflects both administrative needs and symbolic assertions of royal power, as the Picts consolidated their influence over northern and eastern Scotland. Scone, located at the confluence of the rivers Tay and Almond, emerged as one of the most important ceremonial centres in Pictish Scotland, serving as a traditional site for royal inaugurations and assemblies. Its strategic position, at the junction of major river systems, made it accessible to representatives from across Pictish territories, while its elevated location provided natural defensive advantages. Archaeological investigations at Scone have revealed evidence of continuous occupation from the Iron Age through the medieval period, with particularly intensive activity during the 5th and 6th centuries, coinciding with the rise of Pictish royal power. Excavations have uncovered substantial timber buildings, likely serving as royal halls, as well as evidence of craft production and long-distance trade, highlighting the site's significance as both an economic and political hub. The discovery of imported pottery and metalwork also indicates the site's international connections with Ireland, Wales, and continental Europe, reflecting the far-reaching scope of early Pictish diplomacy. Another significant Pictish centre, Fort Teviot in Strathclyde, developed as a major royal site during the early Pictish period. Situated in the fertile valley of the River Nith, the site's name derives from the Pictish elements, meaning hill fort of the Venacone, referring to the Iron Age tribe that once controlled the region. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive earthwork defences that were expanded and strengthened during the Pictish period, creating a fortified complex capable of accommodating large assemblies and housing substantial royal retinues. The ceremonial importance of Fort Teviot extended beyond its role as a royal residence and administrative centre. The site contains numerous carved stones bearing both Pictish symbols and Christian motifs, suggesting its significance in both religious and secular ceremonies. Notably, the famous Duplin Cross, discovered nearby, bears inscriptions in both Latin and Ogham script, commemorating Constantine, son of Fergus, signalling the site's continued importance into the 9th century, as Pictish and Scottish kingdoms began to merge. The development of Burghead as a key Pictish centre highlighted the kingdom's maritime orientation and the growing importance of seaborne trade and communication networks. The religious dimensions of these royal centres reflected the complex spiritual landscape of early medieval Scotland, where traditional Celtic beliefs coexisted with the expanding influence of Christianity. Evidence from many Pictish royal sites shows the coexistence of both pagan and Christian practices, indicating a gradual rather than abrupt conversion to Christianity. The integration of Christian symbols with traditional Pictish motifs on carved stones points to a sophisticated theological adaptation that preserved cultural continuity while incorporating new religious ideas. The emergence of Christianity among the Pictish kingdoms during the 6th century coincided with an extraordinary blossoming of artistic expression, culminating in some of the most sophisticated stone sculpture in early medieval Europe. This cultural renaissance was most dramatically reflected in the creation of symbol stones, massive granite and sandstone monuments that combined traditional Pictish iconography with Christian imagery. These carved monuments, numbering in the hundreds across former Pictish territories, were far more than decorative art. They formed a comprehensive communication system that recorded territorial claims, genealogical relationships, and religious beliefs in visual form. Modern archaeologists have classified the Pictish symbol stones into 3 distinct categories based on their iconography and carving techniques. Class I stones represent the earliest tradition, featuring simple Pictish symbols carved in shallow lines without any Christian motifs. These monuments typically stand between 4 and 8 feet tall, adorned with abstract geometric designs and stylized animal figures, executed with remarkable precision despite their apparent simplicity. The consistent pairing of symbols across various sites suggests a standardized symbolic language understood throughout Pictish territories. Class II stones mark the period of Christian conversion, blending traditional Pictish symbols with crosses and other Christian motifs in more complex designs. These monuments display sophisticated carving techniques, with symbols rendered in raised relief rather than incised lines. The crosses on Class II stones often feature Celtic interlace patterns and zoomorphic designs, reflecting Irish artistic influence, while retaining distinctively Pictish characteristics. The integration of both pagan and Christian elements on these stones suggests a gradual process of religious transformation, with traditional symbols maintaining their significance within a Christian interpretive framework. Classari stones represent the final phase of Pictish stone sculpture, featuring purely Christian iconography. These monuments often take the form of elaborate cross slabs decorated with intricate interlace patterns, human figures, and biblical scenes. The artistic quality of Classari stones is exceptional, with carvers demonstrating mastery of perspective, proportion, and narrative composition that rivals contemporary manuscript illumination. The absence of traditional Pictish symbols may indicate the complete Christianization of Pictish elite culture by the 8th century. The geographical distribution of symbol stones across Scotland reveals significant patterns in Pictish territorial organization and cultural influence. The highest concentrations of these stones are found in the fertile agricultural regions of Angus, Aberdeenshire, and Moray, which correspond to the heartlands of the major Pictish kingdoms. However, isolated examples appear as far north as Shetland and as far south as the Forth Valley, suggesting that Pictish cultural influence extended well beyond the political control of their kingdoms. Many of the symbol stones are strategically placed at territorial boundaries, river crossings, or elevated locations, ensuring their visibility to travelers and marking important points in the landscape. The iconographic vocabulary of Pictish symbol stones includes approximately 30 distinct symbols, often appearing in various combinations across different monuments. The most frequently occurring symbols include the crescent and V-rod, double disc and Z-rod, serpent, eagle, boar, and mirror and comb. Each symbol likely carried specific meanings within Pictish society, though the exact interpretation remains one of the most challenging problems in early medieval archaeology. The consistency with which certain symbols are paired together suggests that these combinations had particular significance, possibly recording genealogical relationships, territorial claims, or religious beliefs. The crescent and V-rod, one of the most widespread and distinctive Pictish symbols, appears on over 50 known monuments across Scotland, further indicating its importance within Pictish iconography. Another prominent symbol in Pictish iconography is the double disc and Z-rod, a fundamental element of their symbolic language. This symbol consists of two circular discs connected by a Z-shaped rod that passes through both circles. The discs are often decorated with spirals, geometric designs, and sometimes zoomorphic elements. The Z-rod's configuration can vary, sometimes appearing as a simple angular line, and other times with more complex curves and decorative features. Its widespread distribution and consistent form indicate that it held significant meaning within Pictish society, possibly representing concepts of connection, balance, or dual authority. Animal symbols on Pictish stones also demonstrate remarkable artistic sophistication and attention to naturalistic detail. The Pictish eagle, with its outstretched wings and fierce expression, is depicted with feathers that reveal an intimate understanding of anatomy. The boar, likewise, is rendered with realistic detail, emphasizing its aggressive power with bristled hide and prominent tusks. The serpent, appearing in various forms, is sometimes a simple curve and other times an intricate interlaced design, reflecting clear influence from Irish artistic traditions. The mirror and comb symbols present unique interpretive challenges, as they seem to connect to personal grooming and feminine identity. The mirror is typically depicted as a circular or oval shape with a handle, often adorned with intricate patterns that mirror those found on actual bronze mirrors discovered in Pictish contexts. The comb symbol, similarly, reflects early medieval examples with its rectangular shape and clearly defined teeth. These symbols appear frequently alongside other Pictish motifs, suggesting meanings beyond simple representations of grooming tools. Recent excavations at sites like Rain and Aberdeenshire have provided fresh insights into the creation and function of Pictish symbol stones. At Prain, a Class I symbol stone was found in its original position near a high-status settlement, providing crucial evidence of the relationship between these monuments and Pictish political centres. The stone was placed adjacent to a large timber hall that likely served as a royal residence, indicating that symbol stones functioned not only as territorial markers, but also as symbols of royal authority tied to elite residences. The technical aspects of creating these stones reflect a sophisticated understanding of stone carving techniques. Pictish carvers selected fine-grained sandstones and granites that could support detailed carvings while resisting weathering. Tools such as iron chisels of varying sizes allowed artisans to both shape broad surfaces and create fine details. Evidence from unfinished monuments shows that the carving process was systematic, beginning with rough shaping and progressing through increasingly refined stages of decoration. Pictish stone sculpture also shows signs of extensive cultural connections with early medieval Europe. Irish artistic traditions are evident in the elaborate interlace patterns and zoomorphic designs found on Class II and Class III stones. Additionally, Germanic influences are visible in certain animal styles and Mediterranean artistic traditions, transmitted through Christian missionary activity, introduced new iconographic elements and compositional techniques, transforming Pictish artistic expression during the 7th and 8th centuries. Pictish metalwork reached extraordinary levels of sophistication between the 6th and 8th centuries, with jewelry, weapons, and decorative objects that rank among the finest examples of early medieval craftsmanship. The silver chains found in the Norris Law hoard demonstrate technical mastery, with intricate links made from twisted silver wire and decorated with granulation and filigree work. Some of these chains, measuring over 6 feet in length, required hundreds of hours of skilled labor and access to large amounts of precious metal, indicating the wealth and patronage available to Pictish elites. The discovery of the St. Ninian's treasure in 1958 on a small island off the Shetland coast offers one of the most spectacular examples of Pictish metalwork. The hoard contains 28 silver objects, including bowls, brooches, sword fittings, and a unique hanging bowl that blends Celtic, Germanic, and Christian artistic influences. The craftsmanship of these items is comparable to or exceeds contemporary pieces from major European centres, revealing that Pictish craftsmen had access to advanced metallurgical techniques and artistic traditions. The silver bowls from St. Ninian's showcase intricate repoussé decoration, where designs are hammered from the reverse side to create raised relief patterns, featuring interlaced animals, geometric designs, and human figures, demonstrating familiarity with manuscript illumination and stone sculpture traditions. Pictish brooches, another significant category of metalwork, reached remarkable artistic heights. The pannular brooch tradition, inherited from earlier Celtic cultures, was transformed by Pictish craftsmen into elaborate status symbols, decorated with intricate zoomorphic designs and inlaid with precious stones. The terminals of these brooches often take the form of stylized animal heads with prominent eyes and curved beaks, executed in silver or bronze with gilded details that would have gleamed impressively when worn by their elite owners. The social structure of Pictish society during this period reveals a complex hierarchy that supported the artistic achievements visible in stone sculpture and metalwork. At the top were the kings of the major Pictish kingdoms, rulers whose authority stemmed from both traditional legitimacy and demonstrated military success. These monarchs maintained courts that attracted skilled craftsmen, warriors, and religious specialists, whose combined efforts produced the cultural flourishing of the 6th through 8th centuries. Archaeological evidence from major Pictish centres shows the physical infrastructure that supported these elite lifestyles and artistic patronage. At Burghead, excavations have uncovered substantial timber halls over 100 feet in length, with interiors divided into multiple chambers to accommodate large retinues and ceremonial gatherings. The construction of these buildings required sophisticated carpentry skills and access to large quantities of timber, indicating well-organized systems of resource extraction and craft specialization. The agricultural foundation of Pictish society was crucial to supporting the economic surplus necessary for the specialization of craftsmen, warriors, and religious personnel. Pollen analysis from various Pictish sites indicates extensive cultivation, with barley, oats, and wheat grown in well-managed field systems that show evidence of crop rotation. The presence of quernstones and grain storage pits at settlements highlights systematic food processing and storage, ensuring that the population could be sustained during seasonal changes and periods of crop failure. Cattle raising was equally vital to the Pictish economy, providing meat, dairy, leather, bone, and horn for crafting. Excavations consistently reveal a high proportion of cattle bones, often from animals slaughtered at optimal ages for meat rather than those that died naturally. This pattern suggests careful herd management aimed at maximizing protein production while maintaining breeding stock for the future. The combination of agriculture and pastoralism created opportunities for specialization and trade, which supported the development of complex social hierarchies. Surplus agricultural products could be exchanged for crafted goods, weapons, and luxury items that marked social status and political authority. The concentration of high-quality metalwork and imported goods at major Pictish centres indicates well-established redistribution networks that channeled wealth from agricultural producers to elite consumers. These trade connections extended far beyond the Pictish territories, linking Scottish communities with partners across the North Sea and beyond. Archaeological finds include pottery from the Rhineland, Mediterranean glass beads, and amber from the Baltic, demonstrating extensive trade networks that brought exotic goods to Pictish markets. These networks also facilitated the exchange of artistic techniques and religious ideas that influenced the Pictish cultural development. The settlement patterns in Pictish territories reflect both defensive considerations and economic opportunities. Hill forts remained vital for defense and ceremonial purposes, but most of the population resided in undefended settlements located in fertile river valleys and coastal plains. These communities typically consisted of clusters of round houses surrounded by agricultural fields and pastures, with larger settlements functioning as local markets and administrative hubs. The roundhouse, inherited from the Iron Age, remained the dominant architectural form throughout the Pictish period, though these structures grew increasingly sophisticated in their construction and internal organization. Excavations at sites like Picts have revealed houses with stone foundations supporting timber superstructures. The interiors of these buildings were carefully planned to accommodate various domestic and craft activities, with hearths, storage areas, and workspaces indicating their role as centers of household production. The transformation of Pictish religious life did not occur overnight, through dramatic conversions, but through patient diplomatic efforts, particularly by Irish missionaries who understood the importance of securing political elite support for lasting change. Columba's journey to King Bride's court at his fortress near Inverness was a carefully planned diplomatic mission rather than an act of spontaneous religious enthusiasm. Columba had established his monastery on Iona just 2 years earlier, positioning himself at the intersection of Pictish, Scottish, and Irish territories. This strategic location allowed him to monitor political developments and identify opportunities for Christian expansion. His decision to approach King Bride directly reflected his understanding that successful conversion required royal patronage, as traditional Celtic political structures concentrated both religious and secular authority in the hands of kings and their closest allies. The fortress where Columba encountered King Bride commanded a position overlooking the River Ness. Its timber-laced stone ramparts enclosed an area large enough to accommodate royal retinues and visiting delegations. Excavations at nearby Craig Fadrig reveal the scale of such royal centres, with massive defensive works protecting elaborate timber halls that hosted the ceremonial and administrative functions necessary to maintain the authority of the kings. The physical setting of Columba's mission emphasized the political aspects of religious conversion, as he sought to influence the most powerful figure in northern Pictland at the symbolic heart of his kingdom. Adamnan's Life of Columba, written over a century after these events, offers detailed accounts of Columba's encounters with Pictish religious traditions and his gradual success in gaining royal support for Christianity. Though these narratives clearly reflect later hagiographical conventions and should not be read as literal historical accounts, they provide valuable insights into the complex process of religious transformation in 6th century Pictland. The text portrays Columba's confrontations with Pictish druids, presenting these encounters as contests between competing supernatural forces rather than purely theological debates. The druids, who opposed Columba's mission, represented the established religious hierarchy that had long maintained Pictish spiritual traditions. In addition to their roles as priests and ritual specialists, druids also served as legal experts, genealogists, and royal advisors across Pictish territories. Their resistance to Christianity reflected both theological disagreement and practical concerns about the threat that foreign religious ideas posed to their authority and social position. The eventual displacement of Druidical influence by Christian clerics was one of the most significant social transformations in Pictish history. Archaeological evidence suggests that the conversion process involved careful negotiations between Christian missionaries and traditional religious authorities, or rather than the abrupt replacement of pagan practices with Christian alternatives. Excavations at sites like Port Mahome in East Ross have revealed evidence of Christian religious activity built over earlier ritual deposits, indicating that sacred spaces continued to be used even as their religious affiliations changed. The placement of early Christian monuments at locations previously associated with pre-Christian activity suggests a deliberate effort to maintain spiritual continuity while introducing new theological concepts. Columba's mission to Kingbridle Day established a precedent for the expansion of Christianity throughout Pictish territories, though the process of conversion varied significantly across different kingdoms and social groups. Royal conversion to Christianity typically preceded broader social transformation in Pictish society. Kings who embraced Christian beliefs used their political authority to encourage similar changes among their subjects. However, the decentralized nature of Pictish political organization meant that conversion occurred at varying rates across different regions, with some areas retaining traditional religious practices well into the 7th century. The establishment of monastic centres became the most visible manifestation of Christian influence, as Irish missionaries founded communities that functioned as religious, educational, and economic hubs. These monasteries differed significantly from their continental counterparts, reflecting the distinctive characteristics of Celtic Christianity. Celtic Christianity emphasized ascetic practices, scholarly learning, and close integration with local political structures, developing in isolation from Roman ecclesiastical authority. Iona emerged as the most influential monastic centre in Pictish Christianity, although its direct political control extended only to the small island where Columba established his community. The monastery's true influence lay in its role as a centre of learning and artistic production. The scriptorium at Iona produced illuminated manuscripts that set artistic standards for monastic communities throughout Scotland and Ireland. Iona's school trained generations of missionaries and scholars, spreading Celtic Christian traditions to new territories. The Book of Kells, likely produced at Iona during the late 8th century, exemplifies the extraordinary artistic achievements of Celtic monasticism and the sophisticated cultural synthesis that defined Pictish Christianity. This magnificent gospel book blends Irish manuscript traditions with artistic influences from Germanic, Mediterranean, and indigenous Celtic sources, resulting in illuminations of unprecedented complexity and beauty. Port Mahomiac, located on the Tarbet Peninsula, developed as another significant monastic centre within Pictish territories. Citrus community established workshops for manuscript production, stone carving, and metalworking, rivaling the achievements of Iona. Excavations at the site have revealed evidence of intense craft production during the 7th and 8th centuries, including decorated metalwork, carved stone architectural elements, and tools linked to manuscript illumination. The scale of these activities suggests that Port Mahomiac served not only local religious needs, but also acted as a hub for artistic production, supplying luxury goods to elite patrons across Pictish territories. Its location, strategically positioned along maritime trade routes, facilitated connections to Pictish communities across the North Sea and beyond, enabling the exchange of exotic materials and artistic ideas. The Book of Deer, produced at a later monastic centre in Deer and Buchan, offers further evidence of Pictish religious and linguistic continuity, though its early history is obscured by later medieval developments. The manuscript contains unique Gaelic marginalia that records land grants and legal agreements using terminology derived from earlier Pictish legal vocabulary. The manuscript's illuminations demonstrate continued adherence to Celtic artistic traditions, even after the political integration of Pictish territories into the emerging Scottish kingdom. The transformation of Pictish art during the Christian period represents one of the most dramatic cultural shifts in early medieval Europe. Traditional symbolic vocabularies were reinterpreted within Christian theological frameworks, while maintaining their distinctive regional characteristics. Symbol stones, which had previously served as territorial markers and genealogical records, were gradually replaced by elaborate cross slabs that combined Christian iconography with traditional Pictish artistic techniques. This transformation was not simply a replacement of pagan art with Christian alternatives, but rather a sophisticated synthesis that preserved cultural continuity while accommodating new religious concepts. The Abelum stones provide exceptional examples of this artistic transition. These cross slabs, which combine Christian and traditional motifs within unified compositional schemes, demonstrate the fusion of Pictish art and Christian symbolism. One of the most famous of these monuments depicts a battle scene, possibly representing the defeat of the Northumbrians at Nectan's Mere in 685 CE. This cross slab commemorates both a historical victory and the assertion of Christian kingship, legitimizing Pictish political authority through divine sanction. The artistic techniques employed in these monuments reveal the development of highly sophisticated workshop traditions, as stone carvers demonstrated mastery of relief carving, perspective, and narrative composition. The precision required to execute intricate interlace patterns on these cross slabs suggests years of specialized training and access to design books or other artistic models that transmitted motifs across wide geographical areas. The iconographic programs visible on these stones reflect a deep theological understanding and careful adaptation of Christian symbols to local cultural contexts. For example, the biblical scene of Daniel in the lion's den, which appears on several Pictish monuments, follows Mediterranean artistic conventions, but is executed in a style that clearly reflects local Pictish artistic traditions. Pictish metalwork also achieved extraordinary levels of sophistication, as demonstrated by the St. Ninian's treasure, which provides some of the finest examples of Pictish craftsmanship. The treasure contains silver objects, including bowls, brooches, sword fittings, and a unique hanging bowl that integrates Celtic, Germanic, and Christian artistic traditions. The quality of the workmanship matches or exceeds that of contemporary examples from major European centres, revealing that Pictish craftsmen had access to advanced metallurgical techniques and artistic traditions. Andrew's sarcophagus and other religious artifacts are prime examples of how Christian iconography merged with traditional Celtic artistic techniques. These objects required access to precious metals, specialized tools, and artistic models, indicating the wealth and cultural connections of Pictish religious institutions. The technical mastery evident in their construction shows that Pictish craftsmen had absorbed advanced metallurgical techniques available in early medieval Europe, while developing distinctive regional styles that reflected local aesthetic preferences. Pictish religious architecture followed unique patterns that reflected both practical needs and theological emphases of Celtic Christianity. Unlike the massive stone churches of continental Europe, Pictish religious buildings were primarily constructed using timber, creating structures more closely integrated with the natural landscape. Excavations at sites like Wythorn and Port Mahomiech reveal churches built with sophisticated carpentry techniques, offering spacious interiors suitable for both liturgical activities and scholarly work. The round towers that appear at several Pictish monastic sites were a particularly distinctive feature. These structures, likely influenced by Irish traditions, served as bell towers, refuges during raids, and symbols of monastic authority visible from great distances. Built with carefully fitted stone blocks without mortar, these towers could rise over 100 feet, indicating the specialized skills of masons trained at major monastic centers. By the late 7th century, the consolidation of Christian authority across Pictish territories coincided with the emergence of powerful military leaders who would alter the power dynamics in northern Britain. The most significant of these figures was Brede mac Mael, whose reign from 671 to 693 CE marked the peak of Pictish military achievement and territorial expansion. Bride's rise to power reflects the complexity of Pictish succession practices, as his claim to the throne stemmed from maternal lineage rather than direct paternal inheritance. His father, Billy mac Nathan, had ruled over the Britons of Alclute, making Bride's ascension a product of the marriage alliances that linked Pictish royal families with neighbouring kingdoms throughout northern Britain. This background gave Bride intimate knowledge of the political and military conditions beyond Pictish borders, which would prove crucial during his military campaigns. Upon assuming the throne, Bride faced a political situation that presented both opportunities and challenges. The Northumbrian kingdom, under King Ecgth, had expanded aggressively into the northern borders of Pictish territory, establishing fortified positions and launching raids that threatened Pictish agricultural communities and trade routes. At the same time, the Scots of Dalriata had recovered from earlier defeats and were advancing into traditional Pictish territories in the Western Highlands. These external pressures, compounded by internal succession disputes that weakened several Pictish kingdoms, required decisive military action. Bride's response went beyond traditional Celtic raiding tactics, which often focused on short-term expeditions. He developed comprehensive military plans that combined diplomatic strategies with well-timed offensive operations designed to achieve lasting territorial and political gains. His ability to maintain large armies in the field for extended periods showed advanced logistical coordination and resource management, reflecting the growing administrative capabilities of Pictish royal governments. The military forces assembled by Brede represented the culmination of centuries of tactical development within Pictish society. Archaeological evidence from weapon burials and settlement sites reveals the evolution of Pictish military equipment during the 7th century. Traditional Celtic weapons, such as long iron swords, were supplemented by innovations derived from contact with Northumbrian and continental European military traditions. These swords, discovered at sites like Batalanabe, demonstrate sophisticated metallurgy, with blades measuring between 75 and 85 centimeters in length, made using pattern welding techniques that provided flexibility and durability in combat. The hilts of these swords were decorated with elaborate patterns combining traditional Celtic motifs and Christian symbolism, reflecting the cultural synthesis of Pictish elite culture during this period. Spear technology also evolved during this time, with evidence from archaeological sites revealing two distinct types of spearheads. Heavy thrusting spears with broad leaf-shaped points were designed for close combat, while lighter javelins with narrow points were effective for long-range attacks up to 30 meters. The wooden shafts of these weapons, although rarely preserved, were made from high-quality timber such as ash or oak, and could reach lengths of up to 3 meters for the largest thrusting spears. Pictish shields underwent significant technological advancements as well. Archaeological findings and artistic depictions suggest that these shields were circular, ranging from 60 to 80 centimeters in diameter, and constructed with wooden planks covered in leather, reinforced with iron bosses and rim bindings. The shields were often painted with distinctive designs, serving not only protective functions but also as identifiers, allowing warriors to recognize allies and enemies during the chaos of battle. They also displayed clan affiliations and personal achievements. Pictish military organization during Bride's reign reflected the hierarchical structure of Pictish society, with different classes of warriors filling distinct tactical roles. At the top of this hierarchy was the king's personal retinue, professional warriors whose equipment was maintained through royal patronage. These elite warriors served as the tactical core of the army during major engagements. Below the royal retinue were the warrior bands led by regional nobles and clan chiefs, who combined military service with agricultural or craft work, but could be mobilized for extended campaigns when needed. Bretagne's strategic vision and military reforms marked a turning point in the Pictish kingdom, laying the foundation for a period of relative stability and territorial expansion. His reign demonstrated the growing sophistication of Pictish military organization, technological adaptation, and political consolidation. Pictish military organization during the 7th century evolved into a highly sophisticated structure that required careful coordination between various types of fighters, including agricultural levies, professional warriors, and elite forces. These fighters typically supplied their own weapons and equipment, creating armies with varied levels of protection and training. This diversity demanded advanced command structures and communication systems to achieve maximum effectiveness on the battlefield. The lowest tier of Pictish military organization consisted of agricultural levies, men who could be called upon for defensive operations or short-term campaigns without disrupting vital farming activities. Armed with simple weapons such as hunting spears, farming tools adapted for combat, and slings, these levies could prove decisive in battles when properly deployed and supported. The fortifications protecting Pictish territories evolved significantly from earlier hill forts, incorporating defensive innovations inspired by Roman and Northumbrian military engineering. Sites like Berghead feature multiple lines of defense, including strategically planned killing grounds where attackers could be exposed to concentrated missile fire from protected positions. The timber-laced stone ramparts that characterized these fortifications offered protection against both direct assaults and siege equipment, while elevated platforms for defensive artillery enhanced their effectiveness. The construction techniques used at major Pictish fortifications demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of military engineering, rivaling contemporary European developments. For example, the ramparts at Berghead included drainage systems to prevent water damage to timber reinforcements, while complex gate structures funneled attackers into narrow passages where they could be contained and defeated. These massive defensive works required coordinated labor across entire kingdoms, reflecting the organizational capabilities that underpinned Pictish military successes. Inside these fortified centers, the dual functions of military strongholds and administrative headquarters became apparent. Large timber halls accommodated substantial garrisons and served as venues for ceremonial activities that bolstered warrior loyalty and morale. Workshops within the fortified areas produced weapons, armor, and siege equipment, while maintaining the specialized tools required for field engineering. Diplomatic efforts that preceded Briday's major military campaigns highlight the sophisticated political intelligence that underpinned Pictish strategic planning. Archaeological evidence and historical sources suggest that Pictish emissaries maintained regular contact with potential allies across northern Britain and beyond. These emissaries gathered information about enemy capabilities while negotiating key agreements that would prove essential in future military engagements. The Pictish alliance networks were complex, often involving negotiations with multiple partners whose interests did not always align with those of the Picts. For example, the Kingdom of Strathclyde provided crucial support based on shared opposition to Northumbrian expansion, while Irish kingdoms offered assistance stemming from their own conflicts with Northumbrian client states. Briday's ability to navigate these intricate political relationships was vital for the success of his campaigns. Intelligence gathering and careful diplomatic management played key roles in the preparation for battle. Archaeological evidence from border regions suggests the existence of forward observation posts, where Pictish forces could monitor Northumbrian military movements and provide secure bases for reconnaissance into enemy territory. This intelligence allowed Pictish commanders to plan their operations with detailed knowledge of enemy strengths, weaknesses, and likely responses to different tactical approaches. The Battle of Dun Nectane in 685 CE represents the culmination of Briday's strategic planning, and it marked a decisive moment in Pictish history. The battle's outcome not only reflected tactical superiority on the day of the engagement, but also the extensive preparation that had characterized Pictish military development under Briday's reign. The Northumbrian army, led by King Ecgfrith, was one of the most formidable military forces in contemporary Europe, equipped with advanced weapons and armor, and commanded by experienced officers. Ecgfrith's army was confident in its superiority over the Picts. The decision to invade Pictish territory, however, reflected a miscalculation regarding Pictish capabilities and intentions. Ecgfrith's forces, the largest ever deployed by Northumbria against the Picts, included the king's personal retinue, regional levies, and allied contingents from client peoples. This massive army aimed to decisively eliminate the northern threat to Northumbrian security. The site selected for the confrontation, near modern-day Dunnerton in Angus, offered significant tactical advantages to the defending Picts. Positioned on elevated ground, it commanded approaches from the south, while providing multiple retreat routes into secure Pictish territories. The marshy terrain also hindered cavalry operations, offering concealed positions for ambushes. Briday's tactical deployment displayed an advanced understanding of combined arms operations. Light infantry armed with javelins and slings were placed on the flanks, where they could harass advancing Northumbrians while avoiding direct confrontation with heavily armoured opponents. The main Pictish battle line consisted of spear-armed infantry, supported by elite warriors from Briday's royal retinue, strategically positioned to take advantage of the terrain and maintain flexibility for responding to changes in the battle. The battle itself was a crushing defeat for Northumbrian forces, with King Ecgfrith killed and his army effectively destroyed as a fighting force. Contemporary sources describe the engagement as lasting most of the day, with Northumbrian advances initially contained and gradually reversed due to Pictish tactical superiority and superior knowledge of the local terrain. The outcome of this battle was a clear demonstration of Pictish military effectiveness and Briday's exceptional strategic foresight, which would influence the political landscape of northern Britain for the next century. The collapse of Northumbrian resistance following the Battle of Dun Nectane was sudden and complete. The army's command structure was severely disrupted, making organized retreat impossible once key leadership figures had been lost to heavy casualties. The immediate consequences of the victory extended far beyond the battlefield itself, fundamentally altering the balance of power in northern Britain. Pictish military prestige surged, establishing the Picts as a dominant force that would influence diplomatic relations across the Celtic world for generations. The defeat of Northumbrian military power eliminated the primary external threat to Pictish security, creating opportunities for territorial expansion that Bride and his successors would systematically exploit. The psychological impact of the victory resonated throughout northern Britain, demonstrating that even the most powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdoms could be defeated through superior strategy and tactical execution. Following the battle, Pictish forces swiftly moved to occupy key positions identified during prior reconnaissance, consolidating territorial gains with remarkable efficiency. Fortified positions along the former frontier were either destroyed or garrisoned with Pictish troops, while new administrative centres were established to govern the newly acquired territories. These occupation forces included not only military personnel, but also administrators, craftsmen, and agricultural specialists, who helped integrate the conquered areas into Pictish economic and political systems. The diplomatic ramifications of the Pictish victory were profound. Neighbouring kingdoms that had previously maintained cautious neutrality now sought alliances with the Picts, while former Northumbrian allies reassessed their political affiliations in light of the changed military circumstances. These diplomatic developments required skillful negotiation and strategic foresight, demonstrating the maturity of Pictish political institutions. The triumph at Dun-Nectane laid the foundation for what would become a period of territorial expansion and political dominance that would characterize the remainder of Bride's reign and beyond. Bride's successor, Angus mac Fergus, who seized the throne around 729 CE through a combination of military prowess and strategic marriage alliances, inherited a kingdom whose confidence had been restored by Bride's earlier successors. Yet Angus recognized that the full potential of Pictish power remained untapped. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on defensive warfare and opportunistic raiding, Angus demonstrated a strategic vision that encompassed the systematic conquest of neighbouring territories. His aim was to establish Pictish hegemony in northern Britain, a goal he would work towards for over a century. The political landscape that Angus inherited was ripe for territorial expansion. Neighbouring kingdoms were weakened by internal succession disputes and external military pressures, creating openings for a skilled strategist. The kingdom of Dal Riata, which controlled much of the Western Highlands and Islands, faced severe internal divisions following the death of King Selbach in 730 CE. These succession struggles fragmented Scottish military resources, providing Angus with an opportunity to intervene. At the same time, the kingdom of Strathclyde found itself increasingly isolated as Northumbrian recovery from Dun-Nectane gradually restored Anglo-Saxon influence in southern Scotland. The kingdom of Alet, meanwhile, was under pressure from multiple directions. Pictish expansion threatened their eastern territories, while renewed Northumbrian aggression menaced their southern borders. This precarious situation forced Strathclyde's rulers to seek allies wherever possible, opening diplomatic opportunities that Angus would exploit with remarkable skill throughout his reign. The military capabilities Angus inherited had evolved significantly since Bride's time. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits and settlement sites shows continued technological advancements in Pictish military equipment. Swords from the period exhibit influences from Frankish and Scandinavian designs, while retaining distinctively Celtic decorative motifs. Pattern-welded blades found at sites like Norris Law showcase metallurgical techniques that produced exceptionally high-quality weapons, requiring specialized knowledge that was carefully passed down within elite warrior families. The campaign began with coordinated attacks on Scottish strongholds in the Lorne and Cowal regions, whose mountainous terrain had traditionally provided natural defences. Pictish forces employed siege techniques, learned from contact with continental European military traditions, utilizing portable artillery and engineering equipment to reduce fortified positions that had been considered impregnable. The capture of Dunedin, the ceremonial centre of Scottish kingship, marked a symbolic victory that undermined Scottish resistance throughout the Western Highlands. Archaeological excavations at Dunedin reveal signs of violent destruction during the early 8th century, with burned timber structures and scattered metalwork, indicating the thoroughness of Pictish occupation. The strategic significance of the occupation was far beyond its military value. By controlling Dunedin, Angus could claim legitimate authority over Scottish territories, as it had been the site of royal inaugurations for generations. This conquest was not merely about military success, it was about symbolic control, establishing Pictish dominance in a region of great cultural importance. The systematic nature of Pictish expansion under Angus becomes clear when examining contemporary sources and archaeological evidence from the conquered territories. Rather than simply conducting raids, Pictish forces established administrative structures that integrated the captured regions into existing Pictish systems. This approach required substantial resources and organizational capabilities, reflecting the economic prosperity within Pictish territories during the early 8th century. The wealth that supported Angus's military campaigns came from multiple sources. Agricultural production had expanded across Pictish territories during the 7th and 8th centuries, with evidence revealing expanded field systems and improved storage facilities. These developments allowed for larger populations and the generation of surpluses, which were crucial for supporting both military endeavours and the growing political and economic structures of the Pictish kingdom. Pollen analysis from sites across Aberdeenshire and Angus shows a significant increase in cereal cultivation during this period, with new crops like rye and improved varieties of barley boosting agricultural productivity. Simultaneously, craft production flourished, reaching unprecedented levels of sophistication, with specialized workshops creating luxury goods for both domestic consumption and long-distance trade. The metalwork traditions, which had produced treasures like the St. Ninian's Isle hoard, continued to thrive under royal patronage, resulting in elaborate jewelry, weapons, and ceremonial objects that showcase Pictish wealth and artistic achievements to diplomatic partners across Northern Europe. The technical mastery required for these productions was made possible by access to rare materials and specialized knowledge, reflecting the extensive trade networks linking Pictish territories to Scandinavia and the Mediterranean. This period of prosperity also witnessed major construction projects, particularly under the reign of Angus mac Fergus. These projects dramatically expanded the scale of royal centres, rivaling contemporary architectural developments in Ireland and Northumbria. At Burghead, archaeological evidence reveals extensive fortifications that added sophisticated defensive features, such as multiple gate systems and internal roadways, capable of accommodating large military formations. The timber halls constructed within these royal centres were impressively large and architecturally sophisticated, with some measuring over 150 feet in length. These halls, with their complex internal divisions, could accommodate various social functions simultaneously. The construction techniques used in these buildings demonstrated advanced carpentry skills, with high-quality timber carefully selected and processed using specialized tools. The surviving architectural fragments reveal artistic programs that integrated traditional Pictish motifs with Christian symbolism, reflecting the cultural synthesis of 8th century Pictish civilization. Religious architecture during Angus's reign similarly mirrored the wealth and artistic patronage available to Pictish institutions. Monastic centres received substantial royal support, enabling the construction of ambitious building programs and artistic projects. The monastery at Portmahomeach underwent significant expansion during this period, replacing earlier timber structures with new stone buildings. Workshops for manuscript production and metalworking were also established at Portmahomeach, producing luxury goods for elite patrons across northern Britain. The location of the monastery on the Tarbet Peninsula, with access to maritime trade routes, further facilitated its role as a hub for artistic and economic exchange. The artistic achievements during this period were marked by the production of symbol stones that reached unprecedented levels of sophistication. The Aberlin cross slab, carved around the mid-8th century, is one such example, integrating historical narrative with Christian symbolism. The iconographic programs on these stones demonstrate sophisticated theological understanding and the careful adaptation of Christian artistic traditions to Pictish cultural contexts. Biblical scenes like the Daniel in the lion's den appear alongside traditional Pictish symbols, blending Mediterranean artistic conventions with local Pictish stylistic preferences. Manuscript illumination also flourished during this period, although the survival of complete examples remains limited. Fragmentary remains of 8th century Pictish manuscripts suggest that monastic scriptoria across Pictish territories produced books that incorporated the finest artistic traditions available in contemporary Europe. The techniques used in these manuscripts required access to expensive materials, such as vellum, precious metals, and exotic pigments, obtained through extensive trade networks that spanned much of Europe. The diplomatic relationships that Angus cultivated further underscore the international recognition of Pictish power by the mid-8th century. Contemporary sources record Pictish embassies to the Frankish court of Charlemagne, indicating that Pictish rulers were seen as legitimate partners in the complex diplomatic networks connecting early medieval European kingdoms. These relationships provided access to luxury goods, military technologies, and artistic influences, contributing to the cultural flourishing that defined this golden age of Pictish civilization. Trade relationships also flourished during this period, extending beyond diplomatic exchanges to encompass commercial networks that brought exotic goods and raw materials into Scottish markets. Archaeological evidence from major Pictish centres includes pottery from the Rhineland, glass vessels from the Mediterranean, and amber from the Baltic, showing the vast trade networks that supported Pictish economic prosperity. Under Angus's reign, Pictish expansion went beyond territorial conquest, involving cultural and economic domination that transformed relationships throughout northern Britain. The establishment of Pictish administrative centres in conquered regions created new markets for Pictish craftsmen and provided opportunities for cultural exchange, influencing artistic and technological developments across the region. The integration of diverse populations within the expanded territories required the creation of sophisticated legal and administrative systems that could accommodate various cultural traditions while maintaining political unity. The military campaigns that secured Angus's territorial expansion continued throughout his reign. Each campaign required a tailored approach, as strategic circumstances and enemy capabilities evolved. The conquest of Strathclyde, for instance, presented new challenges due to their more advanced defensive capabilities and potential support from Northumbrian allies. Pictish forces adapted their operational methods, employing siege techniques and diplomatic strategies to overcome these challenges. Stone sculpture in former Scottish territories during the later 8th century shows clear Pictish influence, with local artistic styles evolving in response to both internal cultural developments and external interactions. While metalwork traditions continued to incorporate Pictish decorative motifs alongside local preferences, this synthesis created distinctive regional styles that reflected the complex political relationships within the expanded Pictish kingdom. These artistic expressions, whether in stone or metal, were a testament to the cultural cohesion of the Pictish people, while also showcasing their ability to integrate external influences without sacrificing their unique identity. The administrative systems that governed Angus's expanded territories were incredibly sophisticated, requiring unprecedented levels of organization. Royal officials were responsible for coordinating military operations, collecting tribute, and maintaining communication across vast territories stretching from the Caithness Valley. The development of these systems marked one of the most significant achievements of 8th century Pictish civilization. These new governmental structures were capable of managing resources and populations across diverse geographical and cultural regions, marking a high point in Pictish statecraft. The economic integration of newly conquered territories within the existing Pictish system created opportunities for specialization and technological innovation, which enhanced overall prosperity and bolstered the military capabilities that sustained territorial expansion. The establishment of new craft centers in strategic locations provided employment for displaced populations, while the production of goods for trade throughout the expanded kingdom strengthened the Pictish economy. These economic developments created positive feedback loops that reinforced political stability and provided the necessary resources for continued military operations, ensuring the ongoing expansion of Pictish influence. However, this period of prosperity, which had defined Oengus's reign and the decades following, would soon be disrupted by foreign raiders whose advanced maritime capabilities and tactical innovations posed unprecedented challenges to Pictish security. In 795 CE, the monks of Rathlin Island off the coast of Ireland watched in horror as strange ships with square sails and high prows approached their monastery. These vessels, propelled by both wind and oars, carried warriors whose appearance and equipment were distinctly different from any enemies the Celtic world had previously encountered. These raiders, known to history as the Vikings, moved with practiced efficiency. Their round shields, iron helmets, and pattern-welded axes marked them as Scandinavian warriors from far across the North Sea. The success of this initial Viking raid, which netted substantial amounts of silver, religious artifacts, and captives, set a dangerous precedent. Within months, similar attacks spread across the Irish Sea region, including a devastating assault on Iona in 795 CE, which forced the evacuation of many of its treasures to safer locations inland. The speed and coordination of these raids demonstrated sophisticated naval capabilities and intelligence networks, allowing raiders to target the most profitable locations while avoiding areas where they might face significant resistance. The Viking longships, typically between 60 and 80 feet in length, revolutionized maritime warfare. These ships combined shallow drafts that allowed them to navigate rivers and coastal shallows with the seaworthiness necessary for extended voyages across the open ocean. The flexible construction techniques of these ships, using overlapping planks secured with iron rivets, allowed them to endure harsh conditions at sea while maintaining structural integrity. This innovation gave Viking raiders a decisive edge, enabling them to strike coastal targets with overwhelming speed and efficiency, then retreat to sea before local forces could organize a response. The first recorded Viking attack on Pictish territory occurred in 795 CE when raiders struck the monastery at Iona. While Iona's location at the intersection of Pictish, Scottish, and Irish territories complicates the precise political affiliation of this target, the attack's impact resonated throughout Pictish lands. Iona had long been a crucial center of Christian learning and artistic production, maintaining close connections with monastic communities across Pictish territories. The raiders' systematic looting suggested they had prior knowledge of Iona's wealth and organization, indicating that these attacks were not mere opportunistic raids, but carefully planned operations supported by reconnaissance. Archaeological evidence from Iona reveals the extent of the destruction caused by Viking raids during this period. Burned buildings, scattered metalwork, and abandoned scriptoriums indicate the thoroughness of the Viking assault. The monks fled with whatever treasures they could carry, and the Book of Kells, likely created at Iona during the late 8th century, may have been evacuated to Ireland during this period, preserving one of the masterpieces of Celtic Christian art from Viking destruction. The psychological impact of these raids was as significant as the material damage. Coastal communities that had once prospered through maritime trade now found themselves vulnerable to assaults from the same sea routes that had previously brought wealth and cultural exchange. The Pictish emphasis on land-based fortifications proved inadequate against raiders who could strike from unexpected directions and quickly disappear back to the sea. The Pictish response to these new threats highlighted the strengths and limitations of their military organization. Royal armies, which had previously achieved success against land-based enemies, struggled to adapt to the tactics of the seaborne raiders. The heavy infantry formations that had dominated battles like Dun-Nectane were too slow to respond to the fast, hit-and-run tactics of the Vikings, while the cavalry forces, which had provided mobility on land, were ineffective at pursuing enemies who retreated to the sea. King Constantine MacFergus, who ruled the Picts from approximately 789 to 820 CE, inherited these security challenges at a time when internal political pressures were beginning to strain the unity that had characterized Pictish territories during Oengus's reign. The extensive territorial expansion of the previous generation had created administrative burdens that stretched royal resources, incorporating populations whose loyalty to Pictish rule remained questionable. The rise of Viking raiders alongside these internal strains marked the beginning of a new chapter in Pictish history, one defined by the struggle to defend and consolidate Pictish power amidst external pressures and internal divisions. The collapse of Pictish stability during the early 9th century was driven by a series of complex factors, including political fragmentation, economic disruption, and the advent of Viking raids that shook the very foundations of Pictish society. The wealth that had once fueled earlier military campaigns was increasingly absorbed by the costs of governing the expanded Pictish territories. As Viking threats grew, resources became scarce, making it difficult for the Picts to maintain the same level of military preparedness. the structural problems within Pictish political organization, particularly the matrilineal succession system, were further exposed during the reign of Constantine Macfergus. While the matrilineal system had provided stability in times of expansion, it became problematic when territorial losses or military defeats undermined royal prestige. Successive claimants to the throne often had legitimate genealogical arguments, but struggled to maintain authority without the military success and support of regional nobles, whose positions could be threatened by shifting political alliances. Archaeological evidence from major Pictish royal centres illustrates the decline of construction activity in the early 9th century. At Berghead, excavations show signs of reduced maintenance and partial abandonment of some defensive structures, indicating that the resources required for upkeep were no longer available. Timber halls, once symbols of royal wealth and power, were hastily repaired instead of systematically renovated, reflecting the economic pressures and political instability of the time. These findings suggest that the Pictish kingdom was struggling to maintain its previous levels of military and administrative sophistication. The Viking raids that began to ravage Pictish territories imposed profound changes on the way Pictish society organized its military. Traditional Celtic battle formations, designed for confrontations between similarly equipped infantry forces, were ill-suited to counter Viking tactics. The Viking warriors, armed with round shields, single-edged swords, axes, and thrusting spears, employed different combat techniques that challenged Pictish methods. As Viking raiders struck from the sea, fortifying coastal settlements became an urgent priority. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gurnis in Orkney shows that existing structures were hastily modified to include additional walls and defensive features, often using salvaged materials from earlier buildings. These improvised defenses highlight the speed with which Pictish communities were forced to adapt to new security threats. The economic impact of Viking raids was just as severe. The luxury goods that had previously flowed into Pictish territories through trade with continental Europe became scarce as Viking attacks disrupted trade networks. Merchants who once maintained regular routes between Pictish ports and European partners found their work increasingly dangerous and unprofitable. The disruptions in trade, combined with the loss of livestock and agricultural tools, created food shortages that compounded the difficulties faced by rural communities. Agricultural activities, already fragile due to the political instability, were further hampered as farmers were forced to abandon their fields and seek refuge in more secure locations. The internal political divisions within Pictish society were also exposed during this time, particularly during the succession crisis, following Constantine's death around 820 CE. Multiple claimants to the throne emerged, each advancing genealogical arguments for their right to rule, but none could maintain control without the support of regional factions. This internal strife further weakened Pictish defences against external threats, as resources that would have been used for military innovation were diverted to resolve civil conflicts. Archaeological evidence from this period shows signs of internal warfare, with burned settlements and weapon deposits, indicating that Pictish factions fought amongst themselves rather than resisting Viking invaders. The Viking raids, which continued throughout the 820s and 830s, exploited these internal divisions. The raiders demonstrated a clear understanding of Pictish political conditions, suggesting that Viking forces had intelligence networks within Pictish territories, possibly through trading contacts or captured informants. These raids were not random, they were strategically timed to coincide with periods of internal weakness in the Pictish kingdoms. The changing settlement patterns and defensive arrangements within Pictish territories reflect the shifting power dynamics of the time. Coastal settlements, once thriving under more peaceful conditions, were abandoned or relocated to more defensible inland positions. New fortifications were built in strategic locations, providing refuge during raids. These defensive adaptations, however, strained already resource-depleted communities and required substantial labor and materials that were in short supply. In response to the maritime threat posed by the Vikings, Pictish shipbuilders began to adopt features from Viking vessels, including reinforced construction techniques and improved sail configurations that enhanced speed and maneuverability. These adaptations, while promising, were slow to take effect and required time and resources that were often unavailable during periods of active conflict. The religious implications of the Viking raids were also far-reaching. The destruction of monastic centers went beyond mere material loss. It symbolized a direct challenge to the Christian worldview that had become integral to Pictish elite culture. The religious communities that had thrived under royal patronage now faced existential threats, and the spiritual and cultural foundations of Pictish society were shaken to their core. The raids forced Christian institutions to reconsider their security and survival, while simultaneously highlighting the vulnerability of Pictish society to external threats. In sum, the period following the Viking invasions represents a profound turning point in Pictish history. The combination of political fragmentation, economic disruption, and military inadequacy in the face of new maritime threats reshaped the Pictish kingdom, weakening its cohesion and leaving it open to further Viking incursions and internal conflict. The rise of Viking power marked the beginning of the end for Pictish political dominance in northern Britain. The apparent success of Viking raids against Christian communities in Pictish territories raised profound theological questions. Many began to wonder about the efficacy of their religious practices and the divine protection that had once been a source of spiritual comfort and political legitimacy. Some communities responded by intensifying their religious observances, while others began questioning the value of maintaining expensive religious institutions that seemed unable to protect them from earthly threats. This period of crisis also saw a decline in the artistic traditions that had flourished during the golden age of Pictish civilization. Stone sculpture became less elaborate, and metalwork showed a reduction in technical sophistication. The patronage systems that had supported skilled craftsmen during the 8th century were disrupted by economic instability and political fragmentation, forcing artists to adapt their work to more limited resources and changing market conditions. The symbol stones produced during the early 9th century are often marked by hasty carvings and simplified designs, starkly contrasting with the intricate monuments of the previous generation. The Pictish administrative systems that had enabled kings to govern expanded territories during the 8th century proved inadequate in addressing the complex challenges posed by simultaneous external threats and internal divisions. The communication networks that had once coordinated military operations across vast territories became vulnerable to disruption by Viking raids, while the tribute systems that had funded royal activities were undermined by economic instability and territorial losses. Regional nobles who had previously accepted royal authority began to assert greater independence, leading to a decentralized political structure that mirrored the fragmented conditions of earlier centuries. In response to the Viking threat, Pictish military leaders began experimenting with new tactical formations to counter the Viking fighting methods and improve coordination between various military forces. Pictish commanders started integrating infantry, cavalry, and naval elements in combined operations, aiming to respond more effectively to the mobility and unpredictability of Viking raids. However, these tactical innovations required extensive training and coordination, which strained military resources that were already being diverted to other urgent needs such as defense and internal security. The convergence of external Viking pressure and internal political fragmentation during the early 9th century created conditions that would eventually lead to the most significant transformation in Scottish political history. As the Pictish kingdoms struggled to maintain their independence from increasingly sophisticated Scandinavian raiders, the fragmentation within Pictish society became more apparent. The collapse of centralized authority and the weakening of military resistance gave rise to a figure who would ultimately unite the fractured territories of northern Scotland under a single crown, Kenneth MacAlpin. Kenneth, whose name appears in both Pictish and Scottish king lists, represented the culmination of centuries of intermarriage and diplomatic alliances between the Celtic peoples of Scotland. However, his rise to power also marked the beginning of the end for independent Pictish civilization. Kenneth's genealogical credentials were strong, reflecting the complex marriage networks that had connected Pictish and Scottish royal families for generations. His father, Alpin the Cockade, had ruled over the Scots of Dalriata during the 830s, while his maternal lineage traced back to Pictish royal families. This dual heritage placed Kenneth in a unique position to exploit the political instability that characterized both Scottish and Pictish territories in the 840s. Military defeats and succession crises had weakened the traditional authority structures of both kingdoms, leaving room for a leader who could unite them under a single banner. The political situation that facilitated Kenneth's rise to power had been developing throughout the previous decade. Repeated Viking raids disrupted the economic foundations of both Pictish and Scottish power, while succession disputes fractured military resistance. The death of Jurgen MacFagusa, who had ruled both the Picts and the Scots since around 837 CE, following a devastating defeat against Viking forces in 839 CE, created a power vacuum that traditional succession methods were unable to fill. Contemporary sources describe this disaster as eliminating the flower of Pictish and Scottish nobility, leaving few established leaders capable of providing continuity during the ensuing crisis. Archaeological evidence from major Pictish centres during this period reveals the extent of political and economic disruption. Excavations at Burghead show signs of sudden abandonment, with valuable objects buried in caches that were never recovered. Kenneth's initial claim to the Pictish throne around 843 CE remains somewhat obscure due to the partisan nature of later sources. Medieval chronicles emphasize the legitimacy of Kenneth's rule, especially his maternal lineage, which aligned with Pictish succession laws. The Scottish kingdom of Dalriata had maintained Gaelic legal customs and political structures, based on kinship relationships and territorial control through clan networks, while Pictish territories operated under different principles, emphasizing royal authority exercised through appointed officials and tribute relationships. Kenneth's unification of these systems required compromises that preserved essential elements of both traditions while creating a more unified structure capable of effective governance. Kenneth's military challenges required him to integrate forces from both Pictish and Scottish territories, which had traditionally operated as separate entities with distinct tactical traditions. The Scottish warriors emphasized individual prowess and clan loyalty in loose formations, while the Pictish military had evolved toward more disciplined formations for coordinated maneuvers on large battlefields. The continuing Viking threat played a pivotal role in Kenneth's efforts to consolidate power. While external pressure created incentives for political unity, it also strained military resources that were needed for defensive operations. The raids by Viking forces that devastated Pictish and Scottish territories during the previous decade continued into the 840s and 850s, requiring constant vigilance and rapid response capabilities that tested the effectiveness of Kenneth's unified kingdom. Archaeological evidence from coastal settlements shows ongoing defensive preparations during this period, including the strengthening of fortifications and the establishment of early warning systems to provide advance notice of approaching raiders. Kenneth's unification efforts were not just military, they also involved complex negotiations between the different Christian traditions that had developed within the Pictish and Scottish territories. The Pictish Church had maintained strong ties with Irish monasticism, while developing its own distinct liturgical practices and artistic traditions. Meanwhile, Scottish Christianity, influenced by broader Celtic Christianity, reflected different theological emphases and organizational structures. Kenneth's success in integrating these traditions required diplomatic skill and theological sophistication to ensure the support of influential clerical leaders while avoiding conflicts that could undermine political unity. A key symbol of this integration was the relocation of religious relics from Iona to Dunkeld during Kenneth's reign. The relics of St. Columba, which had been evacuated from Iona due to repeated Viking raids, were moved to Dunkeld, a new religious centre that could be more effectively defended. This move represented both a practical response to the Viking threat and a symbolic assertion of Kenneth's royal authority over Scottish Christian institutions. Archaeological investigations at Dunkeld show significant construction activities during the mid-9th century, including the building of substantial stone churches and associated monastic structures. These efforts required coordinated labour from across Kenneth's territories and demonstrated the resources available to support such ambitious architectural projects. The artistic programs visible in surviving architectural fragments reflect the cultural synthesis of Pictish and Scottish traditions under Kenneth's rule. The economic integration of Pictish and Scottish territories provided new opportunities for specialization and trade, strengthening the kingdom's overall prosperity. The establishment of new markets and the standardization of weights and measures facilitated commerce between regions that had previously operated under separate economic systems. Archaeological evidence from trading centers shows increased activity in the later 9th century, with imported goods and local products indicating the development of more extensive commercial networks than those that had existed during the period of political fragmentation. Culturally, the unification of Pictish and Scottish territories led to gradual changes in language, artistic traditions, and social customs. The Gaelic language, spoken by Scottish elites, began to replace Pictish in official contexts. This linguistic transition is evident in place names, with Gaelic elements gradually replacing Pictish terms in areas that had once been solidly Pictish. The artistic traditions that had flourished during the golden age of Pictish civilization began to show signs of transformation during Kenneth's reign. Stone sculpture continued, but the distinctive Pictish symbols that had marked earlier monuments gradually disappeared, replaced by purely Christian iconography that reflected the religious preferences of the unified kingdom. The metalwork traditions that had produced masterpieces, like the St. Ninian's Isle treasure, continued to operate during this transitional period. However, the products increasingly reflected the artistic preferences and cultural values of the unified Scottish kingdom rather than distinctly Pictish traditions. While the technical skills of Pictish craftsmen were preserved, the cultural context that had shaped their artistic programs were gradually replaced by new symbolic systems and aesthetic preferences. The legal traditions that governed Pictish society also underwent systematic transformation. The matrilineal succession system, which had characterized Pictish royal families, was abandoned in favor of patrilineal inheritance, aligning Pictish practices with those of the Scottish and broader European systems. This shift had profound implications for the genealogical claims that had traditionally legitimized political authority in Pictish society, effectively eliminating one of the most distinctive features of Pictish political organization. The territorial organization that had defined independent Pictish kingdoms was restructured according to Scottish administrative principles, which emphasized different relationships between central authority and regional power centers. The tribute systems that had connected Pictish royal centers with peripheral territories were replaced by feudal relationships, reflecting the influence of European political models. These changes required extensive negotiation and at times military action to overcome resistance from traditional elites whose positions were threatened by the new administrative structures. Archaeological and documentary sources suggest that the process of unification was not entirely peaceful. Evidence of internal conflict, such as weapon deposits and the abandonment of traditional Pictish centers, points to significant resistance from established elites who refused to accept the new authority structures. The military campaigns that Kenneth led to consolidate his rule were not only a means of extending territorial control, but also of overcoming internal opposition, reinforcing the notion that the unification process was as much about asserting royal authority within Pictish territories as it was about integrating different political entities into a single kingdom. The recognition by foreign powers also provided access to military technologies and tactical innovations that enhanced the kingdom's ability to defend itself against the continuing Viking invasions. The diplomatic success Kenneth achieved further solidified his control over Scotland, ensuring that his reign was not only recognized within the kingdom, but also acknowledged across the broader European political landscape. Despite the dissolution of Pictish political and cultural institutions, the legacy of independent Pictish civilization persisted in various forms across the newly unified Scottish kingdom. While the political structures that had once supported Pictish identity gradually disappeared, archaeological evidence continues to reveal the sophisticated nature of Pictish achievements. These include their advances in art, technology, and political organization. Place names, preserved across the territory, serve as linguistic traces of the once distinctive cultural traditions of the Picts. The iconic symbol stones, scattered throughout the Scottish landscape, remain monuments to a civilization whose accomplishments rivaled those of more widely documented neighbours in early medieval Europe. The enduring legacy of the Picts in modern Scotland speaks to both scholarly efforts to recover lost historical knowledge and popular fascination with the mysteries surrounding their civilization. Archaeological investigations continue to yield new insights into Pictish society, further enriching our understanding of their cultural and political contributions. Museums and heritage sites that house Pictish artifacts play an essential role in preserving public awareness of their achievements. These institutions also serve as educational resources, ensuring that the Pictish legacy continues to inform the public and scholars alike in understanding Scotland's complex historical development. The unification of the independent Pictish kingdoms into a single Scottish state under Kenneth MacAlpin represents one of the most significant political transformations in early medieval European history. The method by which Kenneth achieved this unification illustrates the complex interplay of genealogical legitimacy, military capability, and diplomatic skill, qualities that defined successful political leadership during this period. The cultural synthesis resulting from this union laid the groundwork for the medieval Scottish kingdom, which would later rise as a major European power. However, the cost of this unification was the elimination of one of the most distinctive civilizations in early medieval Britain. The end of independent Pictish rule around 843 CE marked not only the conclusion of an era of political leadership, but also the end of a unique experiment in state formation. The Picts had developed alternative approaches to governing complex societies, approaches that differed significantly from those that ultimately prevailed under the Scottish crown. The Pictish system of matrilineal succession, their elaborate symbol stone tradition, and their sophisticated administrative structures provided a model of governance that was absorbed into the broader framework of the emerging Scottish state. While these alternative Pictish systems were ultimately replaced, they left lasting influences on Scottish cultural development. The assimilation of Pictish elements into the unified kingdom's political and cultural fabric ensured that the legacy of Pictish civilization would continue to shape the kingdom for centuries to come, even as the distinctiveness of the Pictish identity faded from the historical landscape.